At 9:23 on June 14, 2025, the USS Princeton was carrying out another routine freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea when its radar detected something that almost triggered World War III. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, which had been idling about 200 kilometers away, suddenly boosted its speed from 18 to 30 knots in less than a minute and a half. Unbeknownst to the Americans, the John Chang's captain had just received direct orders from Beijing: intercept the U.S. ship and force them to back down first. But Beijing was about to be reminded why provoking the U.S. Navy in open waters is a catastrophically bad idea. Nearby, the Nimitz carrier strike group was doing what American sailors have perfected for more than 75 years: keeping the world's vital trade routes open so Chinese manufacturers could keep selling their budget electronics to stores like Best Buy. The group was operating 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese claimed land, squarely in international waters, through which $3.4 trillion in yearly trade passes like clockwork. Their mission was standard freedom of navigation, predictable routes, transparent purpose, and professional discipline distinguishing real navies from maritime militias. At 9:26, radar classification was confirmed. The contact was indeed a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, assessed as a moderate to high threat. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer calmly monitored the incoming ship's vector, confidence born from 122 vertical launch cells packed with enough missiles to turn any opponent into debris. The ship's spy radar, the most sophisticated naval sensor ever built, provided a crystal-clear image of the approaching destroyer, every feature visible. At its current velocity, it would enter weapon range in precisely 17 minutes. The calculation was straightforward and grim for the Chinese. Their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could cross that gap in under 4 minutes once fired, but Princeton's SM-6S, in surface mode, could strike targets up to 240 nautical miles away, swatting incoming threats like flies. At 9:29, the captain requested an assessment of the Chinese vessel's intent. The answer was clear. At this speed and heading, it would reach firing range in 14 minutes. The suggested response was to go to general quarters, battle readiness. But the captain's reply reflected pure American composure. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves. The South China Sea was crowded with merchant ships, 46 commercial vessels within 50 miles, all depending on U.S. naval presence for safe passage. A Singapore-flagged container ship full of semiconductors, a South Korean LNG tanker valued at $200 million, all would be in danger if Beijing managed to claim international waters as its own. But that would require defeating the U.S. Navy, something that has never happened. At 9:30, Princeton's cooperative engagement capability automatically shared the threat data with every ship in the strike group. The Nimitz herself, 104,600 tons of American diplomacy, carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, adjusted her flight operations with the precision of a Swiss watch. By 9:35, the destroyers Chung Han and Kidd shifted formation, positioning themselves to guard the carrier. Any hostile move from the Chinese would now be a one-way ticket to the ocean floor. Moments later, the tactical situation escalated from tense to dangerous. At 25,000 feet, an E-2D Hawkeye circling above provided an all-seeing view of the region within a 400-mile radius. Its radar suddenly detected multiple aircraft taking off from the Chinese carrier Shandong. The radar returns matched the profile of J-15 fighters, climbing steeply and heading south, seemingly confident, though that confidence was misplaced. Air controllers quickly noticed something almost comical. The J-15s were struggling to gain altitude, likely running with reduced fuel because of the Chinese carrier's old-fashioned ski jump launch system. A minute later, sonar operators aboard Princeton added another piece to the picture. A faint but unmistakable submerged contact, about 80 nautical miles away, its acoustic signature matching that of a Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. The amusing part? It was so loud it might as well have been dragging an anchor. Any trained submarine crew would have been embarrassed to make that much noise. The Chinese forces weren't just being provocative. They were trying to stage a coordinated, multi-domain show of intimidation using equipment that belonged in a museum. Their surface ships dated back to the 1990s. Their carrier-based fighters couldn't take off with full fuel or weapons loads, and their submarines broadcasted their presence like an underwater radio station. It was classic military posturing, the kind that only works if the other side lacks the will or strength to respond. Unfortunately for Beijing, they had picked the wrong navy in the wrong ocean. The U.S. Navy had been refining its mastery of open ocean warfare since before World War I, and these Chinese units were about to learn firsthand why American dominance at sea remained unchallenged. By 9:37, the Nimitz flight deck burst into the kind of controlled chaos only a U.S. carrier can pull off. F divided by a -18E Super Hornets from Squadron VFA-14 Top Hatters thundered off the catapults at 45-second intervals, a symphony of precision that Chinese carriers, still dependent on ski jumps, could never hope to replicate. Steam hissed from the catapult rails as American naval aviation did what it does best: project power with flawless coordination. The 1st Division of Super Hornets soared past 15,000 feet, their APG-79 ASA radars already tracking the incoming J-15s at maximum range. The technology gap was staggering, almost unfair. The APG-79's thousands of transmit-receive modules could lock onto and follow dozens of targets at once, while the J-15's older, mechanically scanned radar swept side to side like a lighthouse beacon, broadcasting its position to anyone listening. The Chinese fighters, limited by their short takeoff system, carried less fuel and smaller payloads. To climb faster, they burned even more fuel, digging themselves into a tactical hole. Meanwhile, the American jets launched at full combat weight, carrying extra fuel and weapons for every possible engagement. Yet, that was just the visible advantage. Each F/A-18 was connected via Link 16, a data network allowing them to share radar and sensor feeds in real time. What one pilot saw, everyone saw. The Chinese pilots, on the other hand, relied on voice radio and individual sensors, like trying to fight a coordinated team while blindfolded. The technological divide wasn't measured in years. It spanned entire generations. Then came the Growlers, the EA-18G electronic warfare. Jets entered the scene silently, not needing to fire a single missile. Their ELQ-99 jamming pods unleashed waves of electronic interference capable of crippling enemy sensors from over 100 miles away. Within minutes, Chinese radar screens began to glitch. False echoes multiplied. Targets blinked in and out of existence, and radar locks failed repeatedly. What looked like 4 American fighters became 12, then 20. Confusion reigned as Chinese pilots tried to engage phantoms, while the real threats maneuvered unseen. The American pilots formed up into a tactical pattern known as the Wall, a defensive formation refined over decades of air combat. One flight at high altitude, 35,000 feet, another at 25,000, and third sweeping low at 15,000. Together, they created overlapping engagement zones that left no escape route for the opposing force. Wherever the Chinese tried to move, they'd step straight into someone's weapons envelope. The Americans had them boxed in 3 layers deep. The Chinese formation, meanwhile, stayed tightly packed, a necessity when your communications can't support wide area coordination. Without a reliable data link, they had to rely on visual cues. keeping close just to stay in sync. It made their movements predictable and dangerously easy to counter. On propaganda posters, the J-15s looked like modern fighters. In reality, they were outdated machines flying into a 21st century battle space. By 9:43, an RC-135V Rivet Joint Patrol aircraft delivered vital intelligence. The ungainly Boeing-based surveillance plane had been orbiting the area for 6 hours, quietly collecting every radio and radar emission coming from Chinese forces. The linguists on board, fluent in Mandarin, were practically amused as they translated. Dark Star confirms Chinese pilots requesting authorization for aggressive maneuvers. Repeat, seeking clearance to buzz U.S. vessels. The Chinese were escalating, but still asking for permission first. To American aviators, trained to seize initiative without waiting for orders, this was almost funny. By the time Beijing approved anything, the tactical situation would have shifted several times over. Back aboard the Princeton, every sensor worked in perfect sync. Her spy radar, capable of tracking an object the size of a baseball at over 160 miles, displayed the Chinese destroyer as if it were a floating skyscraper. Fire control solutions were being updated every second, ready for use if things crossed the line. At 9:47, the Jiangnan finally did exactly that. Its Type 346A phased array radar stopped scanning and locked onto the USS Nimitz, a full fire control lock. In naval warfare, that's the electronic equivalent of pointing a loaded weapon at someone's head. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, the reaction was immediate but calm. Textbook American discipline drilled through endless exercises. The Chinese were gambling that U.S. restraint equaled hesitation. They were about to learn that restraint doesn't mean weakness. The Princeton's fire control radars stayed on standby, but behind those silent consoles sat 122 vertical launch cells loaded with SM-6 and SM-2 missiles, enough to turn the John Chong into scrap metal within seconds. Each targeting solution refreshed continuously. The Chinese destroyer was under multiple overlapping threats from several directions, with virtually zero chance of survival if the situation escalated. The lock persisted for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for China to claim they could have attacked, but not long enough to trigger an American defensive response. It was a carefully staged show of aggression, directed at the wrong audience. The Princeton crew recorded everything. Timestamps, radar frequencies, bearing data. Information that would prove invaluable in a real conflict. But the standoff wasn't over. High above, one Chinese J-15 pilot decided to put on his own display of bravado. Breaking formation, he dove toward an American F/A-18 in what aviators call a thump. A close, aggressive pass meant to intimidate. The U.S. pilot, a graduate of Top Gun, where stunts like that are basic drills, simply rolled inverted and slid behind the J-15's 6 o'clock position. For 3 brief seconds, he had a perfect firing solution. His helmet display lit up with the J-15's twin engines glowing white-hot in infrared. One squeeze of the trigger, and an AIM-9X Sidewinder would have ended the fight instantly. The American pilot didn't pull the trigger. Training and discipline prevailed. He held his fire, and the tense moment passed. But the confrontation was far from over. The Chinese still had one more move to play. Their escalation reached its peak when the submarine made its presence known. The Type 039 diesel-electric sub had been inching closer beneath the waves, using deeper water layers to conceal its approach. At 9:51, it made a fatal mistake, raising its snorkel to recharge its batteries. TO, sonar contact, bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Sub is snorkeling, probable type 039, noise level extreme. The submarine captain either didn't realize or didn't care that Princeton's advanced SQQ-89 sonar system had been tracking him for over an hour. His acoustic fingerprint was already cataloged, his exact position locked within meters. If this encounter turned hot, he'd have maybe 12 seconds to reconsider his choices before an ASROC missile converted his submarine into debris. The tactical situation had become a textbook example of how not to conduct naval warfare. The Chinese forces had boxed themselves in. A carrier to the northwest, a destroyer to the west, and the sub to the southwest, all within easy range of American weapons. If combat began, none of them would last more than 5 minutes. And soon, the U.S. Navy would demonstrate exactly why. At 14:30 hours, the USS Nimitz launched nearly everything with wings. 48 aircraft roared off her deck, the largest single carrier show of force seen in years. Super Hornets armed for live combat. EA-18G Growlers equipped with electronic warfare pods powerful enough to black out a city, and E-2D Hawkeyes commanding the electromagnetic high ground. The afternoon sky darkened beneath a storm of American steel. The Growlers struck first. Their YelQ-99 jamming systems, now at full power, turned Chinese radar displays into digital chaos. Ghost signals multiplied by the hundreds. Real aircraft vanished in the static, and the Shandong's air defense network dissolved into confusion. Controllers stared helplessly at screens that looked like abstract art. Everything was a potential target, and nothing was reliable. Then came the real show of dominance from below the surface. A Virginia-class attack submarine, which had been shadowing the Chinese group for 8 silent days, finally made its move. At 15:47, she surfaced just 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese lookouts to spot her with the naked eye. The psychological effect was devastating. 8 days undetected. Their entire anti-submarine screen, helicopters, sonar buoys, hull-mounted sonar, had missed a 7,900-ton submarine operating right beneath them. If this had been war, their carrier would already be gone. The sub's captain ordered an emergency surface purely for psychological impact. The vessel broke through the waves like a breaching whale, seawater cascading off her hull under the afternoon sun. Cameras on Chinese decks captured the moment perfectly, living proof of American supremacy. After barely 90 seconds, enough to be seen, photographed, and broadcast, she submerged once again into the depths. The message was unmistakable. We control the undersea domain. Meanwhile, in the skies above, American pilots demonstrated air combat maneuvering with surgical precision. The exhausted J-15s, running low on fuel after their steep climbs and constant turns, couldn't match the Americans' agility. Every engagement ended the same way. U.S. fighters in perfect firing position, Chinese jets defensive and draining what little fuel they had left. One by one, they peeled away and limped back to the Shandong, tanks nearly dry. Some pilots probably saw their low-fuel warning lights, a sight they'd only known from training simulators. By 1623, the Shandong's carrier group began its retreat. Official Chinese channels described it as the completion of a scheduled exercise, but everyone understood the truth. They had come to project power, to intimidate freedom of navigation, to claim international waters as their own. Instead, they received a masterclass in why the South China Sea remains, as sailors like to say, America's 6th Great Lake. For now, the message was sent, loud, clear, and unmistakable.